This is my nerd world, and it is filled with Star Wars. Because it's a Star Wars podcast. On the show this week, we're going to be talking about The Mandalorian, Chapter 14, The Jedi. Your name is Grogu now. Bye-bye, Baby Yoda. It was never Baby Yoda in the first place. The child has a name, and his name is Grogu. More importantly, though, we're going to talk about all things Ahsoka in this episode. I'm going to share my thoughts until we get into the show, but I'll just say up front, wow, just flat out, wow. You can email me. You can go to mynerdworld.net. That's the website for all these podcasts that I do, along with my EMBARK science fiction space opera series books. Details are available there at mynerdworld.net. You can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. So, while we will be doing a bit of a spoiler review for The Mandalorian, chapter number 14, we're also going to be getting into your listener feedback this week, of which there is quite a bit. So let us not waste any more time and get to a Star Wars podcast for this week.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
It is a Star Wars podcast, and I am your host, Jon Justice. I'm glad you're with the show again this week. This is going to be a fun one. I'm really looking forward to sharing my thoughts with you of our first live-action appearance of Ahsoka Tano, a character that I never had an issue with when she was first introduced in the Clone Wars animated movie, which was essentially it was an arc of the Clone Wars that they ended up turning into a feature film. I know a lot of people had an issue with Ahsoka from that very first introduction in those episodes in that film. I never had an issue with her. I wouldn't say that I loved the character. I thought she was fine, but I didn't have any problem with the way that she was initially presented. Like everybody else, however, it appears, as the Clone Wars continued and we got to see Ahsoka develop and grow as a character and grow through the series, she has become, like so many, one of my favorite characters inside the Star Wars universe. So I had and I know a lot of people did, I had a lot of trepidation and a lot of curiosity going into this Chapter 14 of The Mandalorian on Friday. And I'll just say right up front, I was absolutely 100% not in any way, shape, or form disappointed by what they were able to pull off and what Rosario Dawson did with that character. Before we get fully into my thoughts, and I'm going to be treating my commentary around The Mandalorian the same way that I normally do. I'm not going to do a shot-by-shot breakdown of the episode. I'm basically just going to share with you sort of my instinctive reactions after seeing the show. I jotted down some notes, some things that were of importance to me, and then I'll look to you to email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and we can talk a little bit more about this particular episode on next week's show. We do have a lot of listener feedback to get to this week as well. But let's start off here, because I want to take one particular issue with Ahsoka and address it, and then move on to what we all saw in the Chapter 14, the Jedi episode. And what I want to talk about is Ashley Eckstein. Ashley Eckstein breathed life into Ahsoka Tano. For those that don't know, Ashley Eckstein is the voice actress for the animated version of Ahsoka. She did it for the Clone Wars. She did it for Rebels as well. And there was a portion of the fandom that really, I think, wanted Ashley to be the live-action version of Ahsoka. For example, we ended up getting in our live-action version of Bo-Katan, Katie Sackhoff did the voice for the animated version of Bo-Katan, and then she ended up doing the live-action version of the character. In my opinion, and this is not a dig on Ashley Eckstein at all, the difference here is that when it comes to Katie Sackhoff, she is already an established actress in live action. Her doing voices for animated shows is secondary to her acting career. There's a big difference there. That's not to say that Ashley Eckstein wouldn't have looked good in the part. There's a lot of photos available where she actually cosplayed Ahsoka, and she looked fantastic. Certainly she has the voice for it and knows the character probably better than anybody apart from Dave Filoni and George Lucas, who created Ahsoka Tano. But with the introduction of Ahsoka into live action and the potential of what this could mean for future projects featuring Ahsoka, of which I know we're going to be getting a live-action Ahsoka Tano Disney Plus streaming show. I personally, based off of what I saw in this Chapter 14 of The Mandalorian, would love to see Ahsoka Tano, played by Rosario Dawson, up on the big screen. I would love to see some type of story arc surrounding this particular character, or at least a series of films or a film where that live-action character can be placed prominently. That's not to say we're not going to get a bunch of great entertainment on live-action TV, but as I've mentioned on the show so often, my first love, and will always be my first love, is the cinema, is going out to the movies to see a film. They've been doing a fantastic job with The Mandalorian. I'm excited for what Disney Plus has to offer. I know that streaming services are the future of entertainment for a while, especially with this stupid pandemic. But I want more movies, and I would love to see Ahsoka Tano up on the big screen, played by Rosario Dawson. So, back to my initial thought leading into the discussion about this episode. When it comes to Ashley Eckstein, I know there's a lot of fans out there that would have liked to see her play that character. She put out a statement with the release of this most recent Mandalorian episode, and I wanted to share it with you. Ashley Eckstein wrote this, and by the way, for those that don't know, she actually runs her own clothing company called Her Universe. There wasn't a lot of female Star Wars centric clothing. There was clothes you could buy that was Star Wars themed for females, but what Ashley Eckstein did with Her Universe was really open up the possibilities and the ability to have really nice female Star Wars gear and clothes to wear with Her Universe. That's her company. But this is the statement that she had to that she put out, didn't have to put out, but that she put out after the release of Chapter 14. Millions of people are meeting Ahsoka for the first time after watching her in The Mandalorian, and I'm excited for them to hopefully go back and watch her journey in the Clone Wars and Rebels. Millions of fans already know Ahsoka, and her presence has come to mean more to them than words in a script. In Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Ahsoka became the eyes of the audience. Viewers experienced the show through Ahsoka, and even through these stories, even though these stories happened in a galaxy far, far away, her feelings and emotions are very relatable to our everyday lives. Ahsoka's strength has inspired, changed, and literally saved millions of lives all over the world. In turn, Ahsoka has become a beacon of hope, light, and genuine goodness. Everyone's relationship with Ahsoka is very different because she triggers the memory of a certain point in a person's life where she's inspired them. Even in the darkest times, Ahsoka brings people joy, and that's what truly matters. Ahsoka taught us that you don't need to carry a sword to be powerful, and Dave Filoni reminded me that kindness is powerful. After 12 years, and hopefully many more to come, of having Ahsoka in our lives, hashtag Ahsoka lives in all of us now. I am blown away by everyone's kindness. I've read all of your messages, DMs, and comments, text messages, and emails, and to say thank you does not even feel adequate enough to express what your kind words mean to me. It is my wish that Ahsoka continues to bring people joy, light, and most importantly, hope. This is the way of Ahsoka Tano. I imagine, and this is just my thought, my opinion on this. I imagine that it must be in some way difficult for Ashley Eckstein to see this character portrayed in live action by somebody other than her. Maybe it's not. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm making an assumption here, and I'm just speaking for me personally. I would think that there would be just a level of difficulty there, even though you want to see this character grow and continue on for as long as possible. I imagine that even being a voice actress, and I believe she may have done some acting, that could be really difficult. But that was a class act thing for Ashley Eckstein to put out. And, you know, if we're being honest, one has to wonder how popular Ahsoka would have been if it wasn't for Ashley Eckstein. It reminds me quite a bit about the initial production of Star Wars A New Hope. This was George Lucas's story. This was his universe that he created. This was a galaxy far, far away that he conjured up in his head. But when it came to the production of A New Hope, for those that have watched the documentaries, you'll know that the initial cut of that film was awful. It was slow, it wasn't very exciting, and it wasn't until George Lucas brought a lot of people in to help in the editing process that we got this film that has become this, you know, a permanent part of our society and will forever be a permanent part of our society. So, you know, it stands to reason that, well, you know, I wonder how popular Ahsoka would have been if it was voiced by a different actress who brought a different set of emotions to it. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Thankfully, we got Ashley Eckstein, who has just done a fantastic job of giving a voice to this character and breathing life into this character that we've loved. The good news is, as we move over to The Mandalorian and the live-action version of Ahsoka, played by Rosario Dawson, the good news is, from this fan's perspective, they absolutely 100% nailed this character.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
We never got any official confirmation that we were going to get Ahsoka in this episode. We all assumed that we were going to get Ahsoka in this episode for a number of different reasons. Basically, and more specifically, Bo-Katan in the episode leading up, or 2 episodes prior to this one, mentions that this is where the Mandalorian needs to go to find Ahsoka Tano. There had been a lot of rumors, never confirmation, that Rosario Dawson would be playing the character of Ahsoka. And we knew that the episode that aired on Friday was going to be directed by Dave Filoni. And seeing all of those pieces come together, one could easily assume that Ahsoka Tano was going to be in this episode. But apart from that, nobody really knew in what capacity. Some individuals had put out a little bit of information that was, you know, along the lines of them having seen the episode and knowing what took place. But that wasn't very detailed. There were some individuals that did leak it on Reddit. I didn't read it, which is a shock because usually I read all those leaks. I didn't bother just because we were so close to the episode, and honestly, I didn't think it was true. And it turns out that a website or a YouTube page called Heavy Spoilers that I think mocked during one of the post-show podcasts we did for the radio show that I do. They turned out to actually have the right information, and they leaked the entire plot of the episode before it came out. But for people like me that didn't know what to expect going into this episode, there was quite a bit of thought that, well, we're probably going to go through this entire episode and not get Ahsoka until the very, very end of the episode. And that didn't happen. The episode opens with Ahsoka. and on this planet Corvus, and it was spectacular. I use my wife Melinda as a gauge. She's a Star Wars fan, more than a casual fan. She's a Star Wars fan. She's not as hardcore as I am. But she's also very critical. I take more of an apologist view of Star Wars, in case you haven't listened to the show. I love everything about Star Wars. I will criticize it when I want to, but ultimately, I love everything about it, and there isn't any part of the films, of all the movies that I don't enjoy in some way, shape, or form. But I use her as a gauge, and she likes watching The Mandalorian. It's not her favorite Star Wars content. She finds it a bit formulaic. And I don't, but she does. She doesn't like sort of the every episode, the Mandalorian gets himself into trouble or somebody needs him to work something out, this kind of thing. And this is just the nature of shows like this. So I look to her to kind of see where her vibe is. And she absolutely agreed with me. The moment that Rosario Dawson came on the screen and we saw a live action Ahsoka Tano, I was sold. It was that good. I'd seen a lot of people do Ahsoka Tano cosplay. Especially on Instagram. There is one Instagram, and you know what? I'm going to pause the podcast. Ashla's _workshop. Ashla's _workshop on Instagram. Probably one of my favorite Ahsoka cosplayers. Looks like Ahsoka. Her costumes are spot on. Really enjoy looking at her Instagram feed. So I kind of used her as my high watermark because this was always going to be a character, at least in my opinion, that would be difficult to translate to live action. A character like Bo-Katan that we got with Katie Sackhoff is one thing. And even then, I would say that, there's a little bit about the hairstyle that doesn't really quite fit Katie Sackhoff in real life, but we just go with it because that's what the cartoon looked like. That's just my opinion. Not really. It's just more of a nitpick than it is anything else. But I genuinely didn't know how they were going to be able to translate Ahsoka to live action and actually make it work. I could see Rosario Dawson playing this character. If the backstory is true, based off of what I read, Rosario Dawson championed to play this character. She's a Star Wars fan and an Ahsoka fan, and she wanted to play Ahsoka. And to me, that's just so rad that here you have an actress, a well-known actress, who's like, I want to play this character. And they let her do it, and I love that because it really drives at the heart, I think, of why this character translated so well on screen. Because, as my wife said, not me, I agreed, but as my wife said, she didn't see Rosario Dawson. She saw Ahsoka. She saw it in the way that she moved. She saw it in the way that she looked. She saw it in the way that she talked. I mean, they just nailed it. And the one thing apart from her presence, right? Because there's just a presence about characters, and when you have these characters that you're so used to seeing in live action, in animation, you just, for me, I was like, okay, are they going to be able to grab the same type of quality? Like, for example, in the Clone Wars version of Ahsoka is very different looking than the version of Ahsoka that we get in Rebels, and yet both those versions are fantastic. They are Ahsoka, even though they look different. Rosario Dawson has done the same thing with the live-action version of Ahsoka. And what I really loved about this episode is that they took their time, they slowed it down, and they gave us a full Ahsoka episode. And with that, they gave us, in my opinion, and I know people are going to disagree with me on this, but in my opinion, they gave us the most Star Wars, doing that thing with my fingers, Mandalorian episode yet. The Mandalorian has absolutely been Star Wars. There is no doubt about that in my mind whatsoever. It looks like Star Wars. It feels like Star Wars. It has the fun. It has the adventure. It has the danger. It has the excitement of Star Wars. What this episode did is what I've been talking about with regard to The Mandalorian and what I personally wish it would do. It brought in the other elements that hadn't been there yet. We got the Jedi. We got a little bit of Yoda's theme when we discover that the child's name is Grogu, and we'll get in a little bit more into that. We got a Force training montage that actually brought the Mandalorian into that training montage. This was a Mandalorian episode, and this isn't surprising because Dave Filoni directed it, but this was a Mandalorian episode that, to me, was a live-action Clone Wars episode. That's what this felt like. Now, it felt like that for all the reasons that I just mentioned. It is still The Mandalorian. It definitely had all the Mandalorian elements in it, but it was this almost perfect hybrid of The Mandalorian and what we got with animated Clone Wars, but now we got it in The Mandalorian. And it has now instantly become my favorite Mandalorian episode. I've been enjoying this season abundantly more than season 1. The action sequences in this season have just been spectacular. I can't even tell you how many times that I have watched the dual X-Wing Razor Crest chase from outer space down to the planet and through the clouds. I loved that. The TIE Fighter versus Razor Crest battle that takes place at the end of the Siege episode was absolutely fantastic. I love all of that. This entire season has just been great. And this episode was very different, but has instantly been elevated to my favorite one because of these other elements that have now been brought into it. And just what a great job Rosario Dawson did of Ahsoka Tano. The way that she carried herself, the way that she spoke. When she smiled, there is a lightness and there is a joy to Ahsoka that Rosario Dawson didn't show a ton of because the story didn't warrant it. But when she did show it, I saw Ahsoka Tano. That was not Rosario Dawson, and it instantly made me want a Rosario Dawson, like I mentioned at the start of the show, a live action TV show and film. The last thing that I want to mention with regard to Ahsoka as we move through the rest of the episode, and we'll be talking a little bit more about her. But the last thing specifically on Ahsoka that I want to bring up and focus on was the lightsaber battles and the way those were choreographed. That was another thing that I was very curious to see how they were going to translate that to live action. We've obviously seen our fair share of lightsaber battles. There's no doubt about that. But Ahsoka has a very unique style. She always has since those first episodes when we met her all the way through Rebels. She's a bad A, and that's just the easiest way to put it. And she always had a very specific dynamic when it came to her lightsaber technique. They also nailed that in this episode. I really felt that they did a spot-on job of taking the limitations of what you have with live action, because you can obviously do a lot more in animation when it comes to these lightsaber battles. And they translated that perfectly to live action, and even if you couldn't see her face, if you just saw this hooded figure with two bright white glowing lightsabers, even if you didn't know that she was supposed to have those sabers, like if you didn't know they were specific to Ahsoka, I could look at that and go, yeah, that's Ahsoka Tano, just by the way that she moved. And it elevated everything about this particular episode. I don't even know how to put it. I was so excited. And it got me excited for the rest of Star Wars too, because they're making such great content and they're treating it with such care and they're getting it so right. The Mandalorian is turning into what I had hoped. We're seeing the developing plot lines around these characters that we're meeting, which it appears is going to lend itself to what I've talked about so often on the show and what's been rumored, and that is this Game of Thrones-esque larger type of storytelling within separate live-action shows, not in one show. And there was actually a moment when the female, and I can't remember her name right now, so forgive me, but the female in charge of the city was standing on top of the Citadel wall with that big bell behind him with Michael Biehn there, which was just awesome to see him. I was such a fan, always been a fan of his since the 80s, The Abyss and Terminator and Aliens. I mean, I love that actor. But there was a moment when they were standing on the wall that I actually immediately thought Game of Thrones. This feels very much like Game of Thrones. But you can see these we see these plot lines developing. We have not only the Mandalorian story, but we have Bo-Katan's story, right? We have the genetic aspect that was introduced in last week's episode. We have the Dark Troopers that was introduced in last week's episode. We have the Darksaber involved, obviously, with Bo-Katan. But now we meet Ahsoka, And we have this storyline that develops where she doesn't want to train and refuses to train the child because of, I'm sorry, I did it myself, didn't I? Grogu. She refuses to train Grogu because of his connection to the Mandalorian and her concern over what happens with Force wielders and potential Padawans when they get too close to a particular individual. There was a lot of just gut-wrenching emotional moments as, Ahsoka in the episode alluded to Anakin Skywalker. But then we know that she's searching for Thrawn, which was the other thing that I was waiting for with the introduction of Ahsoka, is that the last time we saw her was at the end of Rebels, which was post-Return of the Jedi, and she and Sabine were supposed to be embarking on a journey to go find Ezra and Grand Admiral Thrawn. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in listener feedback because a couple of you have reached out and were like, "Hey, can you give us some background on these characters for those of us that aren't familiar with some of the animated material?" And I'll do that a little bit later on. So it sounds as if, and this is speculation on my part, we know we're going to get an Ahsoka Tano TV show, but it sounds as if that TV show may be focusing on her search for Grand Admiral Thrawn, which I really hope to see, and I'm dying to see a live-action Sabine in the process. But just, bravo to Disney, Dave Filoni, Lucasfilm, Jon Favreau. Just hit it out of the park with this one. This was probably the most nervous I was to see a character in live action that is so beloved, that I love so much, next to Hera. Like, I'm dying to see a live-action Hera. I just could see to see the entire Rebels cast, because I love that series so much, in live action would just be amazing. But they nailed it, and they really are taking good care of the Star Wars genre, right? Because that's what it is. It's its own genre. And I feel that they've done that with all the content. I know, right? Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker have their controversies. I know a lot of people, are split or as split on The Rise of Skywalker as they are The Last Jedi. That's for them. I love that film, and I thought that it pays tribute to Star Wars and is the perfect ending to the nine movie arc. But when it comes to Ahsoka, before we get into Grogu, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com is the email address. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. So let's talk a little Grogu. The moments where we find out that's his name, and the Mandalorian calls him that, and he looks at him like a little puppy, having their master call their name for the first time, was one of the most adorable things among hundreds of adorable things that Grogu has done. What intrigued me was the backstory. Ahsoka is able to force connect with Grogu, and they can read each other's thoughts and feelings. And she tells the Mandalorian that Grogu was raised in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Many masters train him. At the end of the Clone Wars, he was hidden. Someone took him from the temple, and then his memory goes dark. I've only known one other being like this, and she says that's Yoda. And then we get a little bit of the Yoda theme, which was awesome. Just absolutely incredible, bringing in that hint of Yoda's theme, and also sort of a westernized version of Ahsoka Tano's theme too. But this backstory of Grogu really got me curious, because I'm not under the impression that they're going to toss this kind of stuff out without giving us an answer at some point in time. So here we have this Yoda species of Grogu who is actually alive, and we would know that would be the case because he was, he's 50 years old, right? So he would have been born right around exactly the same time that Anakin Skywalker was born, had masters training him, and then he was hidden by somebody from the temple, and then his memory goes dark. Now that, to me, that just kicks open the door for all kinds of possibilities. So I'm just going to give you one. And this was the first one that came to my mind. No, I haven't fleshed this out, okay? This is just my instinctive reaction. However, given what Ahsoka says about Grogu's backstory, raised in the temple, trained by masters, he was hidden at the end of the Clone Wars, right, in the temple. Someone took him from the temple, and then his memory goes dark. All right, so that would conceivably, right, take you to Order 66, Anakin Skywalker turning to the dark side, going back to the temple and wiping out a bunch of the younglings. Okay. And I don't know how this would play out, and I'm probably wrong, but I want to share it on the show just in case that I'm right. But how interesting would it be if it was actually Anakin was the one who saved Grogu? Maybe memory tried to force memory wipe him and then hid him somewhere until he ended up popping up later on, right, in The Mandalorian, and we don't know actually what happens there. I just liked this idea, and I don't know why, but it was the first thing that I thought of when she said someone took it from the temple as memory goes dark. The first name that popped into my head was Anakin Skywalker. Now, that would run counter to where he was in that moment of time. In that moment of time, he's going and he is exacting his revenge. He's exacting revenge on behalf of Palpatine, right? Darth Sidious. He goes to the temple. He wipes out the younglings, which is awful. So you kind of have to scratch your head and go, well, why wouldn't he wipe out Grogu? Unless he came across Grogu separately from when he went to the Jedi Temple because of his connection to Yoda and the training, right, alongside of Obi-Wan Kenobi that he's had with Yoda, that he couldn't bring himself to kill Grogu. And therefore, he ends up taking him, hides him away for somebody else to go in and find him. I'm probably wrong, but just wanted to throw it out there in case I'm right, because that, to me, would be a very interesting dynamic to find out down the line, depending on what happens with Grogu's character moving forward and whether or not he gets trained, right? Because we have another angle to this as well. Ahsoka tells the Mandalorian she's not going to train him, right? But he needs to take Grogu to this other planet where, right, place him. Getting back into my notes, she says, place him on the Seeing Stone atop the temple on this planet. If he reaches out through the Force, a Jedi may sense his presence and come searching for him. Now, a lot of people have been speculating about this, right? There's a possibility it could be Cal Kestis from Jedi Fallen Order. You could have that actor, getting back to the initial conversation that we had about animated voice actors playing live action. Cameron Monaghan is a live action actor, right? He's doing voice work and doing mocap and voices for video games is secondary to him being an actor. That Jedi Fallen Order character was based off of Cameron Monaghan. He looks just like him. So, it would make some sense that the actor would play him, right? And this could be forming into a live-action spit-off of perhaps Cal Kestis training Grogu someplace else in another part of the universe, right? A lot of people have also said, well, what if that actually means that it's Luke that's going to sense him and his presence and come searching for him as well? But again, let me just put a period on my theory. I just thought it would be really interesting if this particular character grows into a much more important character within the Star Wars universe and further stories are told about Grogu, right? Because I think that's kind of a given. Here you have this 50-year-old character that is beloved by the fandom already, that we know was being trained by Jedi, that goes all the way back and has a connection to the Clone Wars and the prequels. Why wouldn't you capitalize on that and we get an abundance of Grogu stories as he grows into a Master Jedi, right, at some point in time? So, that being said, I find it really interesting that if it was Anakin that actually saved him in a moment of dark side weakness during the Jedi Purge, wouldn't that be fascinating, right? And there's been other speculation out there. There has been some talk about a Mace Windu live-action show, which would be a bit of a head-scratcher. I don't know how many times we can bring back a character that was seemingly dead. I really don't want that to become a thing in Star Wars, but I suppose it's possible, so that's possible as well. What are your thoughts? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com is the email address, and I'll share your thoughts on next week's show. All right, a few more things about this particular episode. Ahsoka comparing Din as Grogu's father was very interesting, right? the connection the two of them had and her reluctance to train him because of the connection that Grogu had to the Mandalorian and what she had seen happen to other individuals, specifically Anakin Skywalker, whether it was the connection to his mother or whether it was the connection to Padme, the connection to, boy, Anakin really had it bad, right? To Qui-Gon Jinn, right? Okay, all of that. But for those that don't remember, one of the Mandalorian behind-the-scenes gallery roundtable episodes, Dave Filoni went on this amazing long monologue about how Qui-Gon was the father Anakin needed, and his death was what cemented Anakin's descent to the dark side. At the time, none of us really thought much about it, but thinking about what's happening now between the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, and Grogu, right? You could definitely see that same type of relationship forming. And, I mean, not see it, we have. I mean, Ahsoka pretty much called it out. So, again, these themes that are already settling in, that famous quote from George Lucas, it's like poetry, it rhymes, right? I just find that really fascinating. And now we're at that point of The Mandalorian that I talked about so many times, that what the show needed to do when they're doing it, they're giving us things to talk about. They're giving us things to speculate about. We've got the Jedi now. We've got the Force. We have these characters, right? I suppose it was maybe impatient of me to have, I don't want to say complain, it wasn't really complaining, but to question that, because these things do take a while to develop. So here we are into episode, chapter 14 of The Mandalorian, and they are doing exactly what I said the show needed to do, which is just going to increase the fandom and really set up those other live-action shows we're going to be getting and bring about even more excitement for them. All right, prediction. This is probably the last we'll see of Ahsoka on The Mandalorian. I do personally believe that this is setting up the Thrawn, the search for Thrawn with along with Ahsoka and Sabine searching for Ezra and Thrawn, right? What if, and again, going back to what The Mandalorian needs to do with Grogu, what if placing him on that temple actually is Ahsoka's way of trying to find Ezra, since he was being trained as a Jedi, and perhaps using Grogu could be a way for Ezra to connect with Grogu so that Ahsoka could find him. Now, if that's the case, then it probably blows away my prediction that this is the last of Ahsoka we're going to see in The Mandalorian. Just throwing that out there. But I do believe that this is probably the last we're going to see of Ahsoka for the rest of the season. We'll be focusing on The Mandalorian, and this was our introduction to a live-action Ahsoka to get everybody on board, which is why we pretty much got a full Ahsoka episode, right? My previous comments, they took their time, they slowed it down, and they gave us a full Ahsoka episode. And now we're all ready for an Ahsoka live-action TV show, right? And again, I loved it. What did you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. I am very curious to find out what your thoughts were. All right, let's go ahead and do this.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, we got a lot of listener feedback this week, and we'll start off with, got a couple from Disney Desi, who I appreciate, friend of the show, writes this: I have a new theory. Because the Empire First Order is unsuccessful in their attempts to get Grogu, they will switch gears and tactics and start going after baby Ben Solo instead. Not because they want a new Vader, but actually because they want access to his high M count. If Anakin had a higher M count than Yoda, then it makes sense that Ben would have a higher M count, we're talking midichlorians, than Grogu. Leia felt Snoke Palpatine going after Ben while he was in the womb, which should be about the same time frame as The Mandalorian. Yeah, I dig it, Desi. I'm not exactly sure how that would play out in terms of plot and storyline, or in what capacity they would be able to do that within the show, unless they're talking about doing something separate. But I like the idea. Disney Desi also had emailed me earlier in the week and asked this: I hope you have another podcast just to talk about the Lego Holiday Special. I was cracking up. Many references to Galaxy's Edge that I think most others who don't frequent the parks as often as I do might have missed. Yes, I have watched the holiday special. And again, going back to my wife, I enjoyed it more than my wife did. I enjoyed it immensely. I really had a lot of fun. I plan on watching it again before Christmas time. And around that time, when I do a Christmas episode with that thing with my fingers, I will definitely go and talk more at length about the holiday special. But I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun watching it with my 13-year-old and my wife, and we were chuckling throughout the whole thing. All right, getting back to listener feedback, and a friend of the show, family member whom I love, Freddie, writes this: Hi, Uncle John. It's me, Freddie, again. Thank you for answering my question on the podcast, Mr. Jon Justice. I have a question about the Black Saber. Do you see it in Star Wars movies? No, you do not, Freddie. The first appearance in live action of the Darksaber was in the final episode, as it was one of the final shots, of Season 1 of The Mandalorian, the Redemption episode, when we see Moff Gideon carve his way out of his wrecked TIE fighter with the Darksaber in his hand. That is the first time we see it in live action, and it was never shown in any of the films. It only made appearances in the animated shows in Rebels and Clone Wars. Thank you as always, Freddie. I appreciate it, and I hope you and your family are all enjoying my podcast. All right, Purple Flower, friend of the show, writes this: These new episodes of The Mandalorian are getting better each week. However, because I've only seen the live-action movies, I am not very familiar with certain characters that keep being mentioned on the show. I have heard of Ahsoka, Bo-Katan, and Thrawn from listening to podcasts like yours and seeing other YouTube videos. At some point, would you mind explaining the background of these characters to people like me who have never seen the animated series? All right, sure. And actually put together some detailed notes and we can run through this quickly, because I imagine there's probably quite a few people that aren't nearly as familiar with these characters as some of the rest of us are. And this goes back to what Ashley Eckstein had written about in her comments about Ahsoka appearing in live action, and that this is the first time that a lot of people have been introduced to Ahsoka. So first off, we'll start off with the aforementioned Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano was a former Jedi Padawan who, after the Clone Wars, helped establish a network of various rebel cells against the Galactic Empire. A Tugrunta female, Tano was discovered on her homeworld of Sheely by Jedi Master Plo Koon, who brought her to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant to receive Jedi training. Following the outbreak of the Clone Wars, Jedi Grandmaster Yoda assigned the young Tano to be the Padawan learner of Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. After the Galactic Empire came to power, Tano went into hiding, disguised as Ashla. Following the evacuation of Rada, Tano, that's where she was, she joined Senator Bail Organa's growing rebel movement. She became the manager of his intelligence network and adopted the codename Fulcrum. As Fulcrum, Tano provided intelligence to various rebel factions, including Hera Syndulla's Spectre rebel cell. Tano returned to a freed Lothal and joined Sabine Wren in her quest to find a missing Ezra Bridger who had disappeared during the liberation of Lothal. So the one section in here that kind of got left out is she's found, she's brought to the Jedis, she's to the Jedi. She's trained as a Jedi, and she's Anakin Skywalker's Padawan learner. Towards the end of getting near the end of the Clone Wars, and of course we got the added additional episodes in this final season of the Clone Wars. She was accused of doing something that she didn't do, and because the Jedi didn't trust her, she leaves the Jedi Order, only to come back to assist the Jedi at the very end of the Clone Wars. And that's when we pick up of the Galactic Empire coming into power. She goes into hiding on Thebeska, and Rada disguised as Ashla. And then she ends up joining in Senator Bail Organa's and his rebel movement. She becomes Fulcrum, ends up helping the rebels there. And then we saw that she kind of goes into exile herself until she appears after Return of the Jedi to go try to find Ezra, who disappeared with Thrawn, as the notes said, during the liberation of Lothal. And this is one thing, and I want to say, because this gets really confusing, this is one thing I wish that Disney would do. I wish Disney would try to find some way to add in timelines to the content they're putting out, because I know a lot of fans that are slightly bigger fans than casual fans who really get their heads spun on the time frames of when all this stuff takes place because of just how many different pieces of content there are, right? The guy I do the show with, my best friend Drew, he was thoroughly confused when Ahsoka showed up, knowing she was going to, but then kind of not understanding when exactly in the timeline this occurred, because he was introduced to her during the Clone Wars, and this is way after that. So I wish Disney and Lucasfilm would try to find some way to establish some sort of mechanism to put things in a particular time frame to make it easier for the casual fans to follow. All right, Bo-Katan was a Mandalorian, human female, the leader of the Night Owls, and a lieutenant in Death Watch, a terrorist group, and later, during the Imperial era, became Mandalore. During the Clone Wars, Bo-Katan Kryze's sister Satine ruled as the Duchess of Mandalore, and the Kryze sought to undo her pacifist teachings, believing that Mandalore should take pride in its martial history. After Governor Pre Vizsla of Concordia was publicly exposed as the leader of Death Watch, the Splinter Group was exiled from the Mandalore system. Let's see here. During the Republic's occupation of Mandalore, the government reorganized into the Galactic Empire. A new wave of violence claimed the planet. Clan Wren of Crow Nest chose to resist the Empire, leading the Imperial loyalists of Clan Saxon to fight them. These actions threw Mandalore into another civil war, and during the war, Bo-Katan encountered Countess Ursa Wren and Sabine Wren of Clan Wren, who were seeking a Mandalorian worthy of wielding the Darksaber and claiming the title of Mandalore. With the Wren's approval, Bo-Katan took the weapon and rallied the support of several Mandalorians. Sometime after the Great Purge, Mandalore was left devastated, and Moff Gideon had come into possession of the Darksaber. Bo-Katan formulated a plan to reclaim the weapon from Moth and her return to Mandalore, which, of course, we saw in The Mandalorian. And then lastly, probably one of the most well-known characters, especially within the expanded universe, is Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's a fictional character, a major antagonist of the Star Wars franchise. Introduced back in 1991, Timothy Zahn's novel Heir to the Empire, he is an Imperial military commander who is taking control of the Galactic Empire's remaining forces 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. Thrawn faces off against classic Star Wars characters like Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, Chewbacca, Lando in the Thrawn trilogy, but is ultimately defeated. He is seemingly resurrection in the Hand of Thrawn duology in 97 and 98, and his backstory is explored in various other novels, short stories, comics, video games in the Star Wars expanded universe. Now, though Lucasfilm rebranded the expanded universe works as Star Wars Legends in 2014 and declared them non-canon to the franchise, Thrawn was reintroduced back into canon in the third season of the CGI animated television series Star Wars Rebels, where he was voiced by Lars Mikkelsen. Rebels is set at a point in the Star Wars timeline earlier than Thrawn's storylines in Legends continuity, and as such, sees his defeat much earlier on, shortly before the events of the original Star Wars A New Hope. The character is also featured in a new Thrawn book trilogy by Timothy Zahn. After rising to the rank of Grand Admiral, Thrawn commanded the 7th Fleet and was assigned to destroy the rebels of Lothal sector, eventually tracking them down and culminating at the Battle of Antolon. Now, what's interesting about that is the Thrawn 7th Fleet symbol actually appears on the helmets of the HK assassin droids that make an appearance in this most recent Mandalorian episode, The Jedi, that we've been talking about during the show. So there you go. Phoenix Squadron was largely destroyed at the Battle of Antolon, and Thrawn encountered a being known as the Bendu, who predicted his eventual defeat. After many battles with the rebels, Thrawn and his fleet were defeated during the liberation of Lothal by Ezra Bridger, and the Purrgil, giant space whale octopuses, wrapped Thrawn in their tentacles and took him and Ezra through hyperspace to parts unknown, which again, we expect that we're going to get the backstory on that in a live-action Ahsoka TV show. So there you go, Purple Flower. I hope that answered your questions and didn't make it all the more confusing, because I think that I'm confused. All right. Raleigh, head curator of the Graph Archive Star Wars Digital Preservation Project, writes this. I just saw the latest episode of your podcast download to my phone, but waited to send a message about the most recent episode of The Mandalorian. I believe he's talking about the Siege. I have been worried about him actually becoming a secondary character in his own series. If you read this note on the show, it will be after the episode that Dave Filoni is directing, which is expected to be the Ahsoka episode. So far, we have had the child, Boba, Bo-Katan, and probably now Ahsoka. I was hoping that originally we would have a story that didn't run into the same people all the time. For a galaxy of millions of planets, it sure seems small sometimes. There have been rumors of Luke showing up in some form, and while I love the show, it will really stretch my probability if that happens. This is one reason why I love the original story that broke from the norm. The Tales of the Jedi comic series, starting in 1993, was outstanding. Not a familiar face in sight, and they tell an excellent story, one that carried on for many years. I want more things like this, but I worry we will have the same things in the Cassian series and the Obi-Wan series. The latest episode, The Siege, at least took a break from bringing characters in from other shows, and I want more of that. I could go to social media groups, and everyone is all in for having everyone show up, so I feel like I'm completely alone with this. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I'm curious about how you feel. Thank you for the shows. May the Force be with you. All right. So, I've personally never had an issue with the small Star Wars universe angle that people have. The introduction, the inclusion of these well-known characters within The Mandalorian, apart from this most recent episode, have really just been quick hits, in my opinion, to establish storylines and threads to pull on in other stories that'll be connected to The Mandalorian. And for that, I appreciate it. My headcanon, if I needed to rationalize, right, why this is all happening, my headcanon tells me it's the Force. The Force brings these people together because they're important to one another. So that's why you have the Mandalorian potentially connecting, eventually, maybe, who knows, with Boba Fett, even though we saw him, right? But that's why with Grogu by his side, he's drawn to this remote, outpost on Tatooine to find Cobb Vanth, who has Boba Fett's armor. All of these things, to me, if I try to rationalize it, I go, it's the Force doing this. It's the Force sending these people on their paths and bringing people together to solve larger issues, right? That's where my head is at on it. I don't feel like it's the world being smaller. I happen to like the storytelling and the bringing in of these characters. And it's, one of the things about Star Wars that I've never really had an issue with. If you wanted to, and I'm not saying you are, Raleigh, but you could easily go and kind of break it apart, look at the entire galactic map and go, how is this possible? How is it possible that Cobb Vanth would be riding around on Anakin Skywalker's, on a speeder made of Anakin Skywalker's pod racer? What is the likelihood of that? And you know what? I don't care. I think it's cool. I never have an issue with it. I like the fact they're bringing in these characters. I think they're doing a good job of spiking them in and then sending them on their way to develop other projects, which I believe is what they're doing. So for me and this fan, I disagree. I don't feel like it's the universe getting smaller, and I'm all for bringing in those elements and those characters within these episodes of The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian, to me, is kind of, we're going on the ride with The Mandalorian. He's our eyes, right? To a certain extent, as he goes on these journeys and meets all these characters that he's never met before. It's almost like Disney did it intentionally to bring in this character that's not Boba Fett and not IG-88, but it's IG-11 and this guy that looks like Boba Fett, but he's really the Mandalorian, in order to introduce the fans to perhaps a bunch of characters that they may or may not have known before, with the potential of creating other projects from them that they'll then be familiar with. It's like they had it planned. Thank you, as always, Raleigh. I appreciate it. All right, and last email of the week comes from friend of the show, Miranda, who says this: can you believe we are less than a month away from the anniversary of The Rise of Skywalker? I feel like I've been going on my own personal journey with this film as a Star Wars fan, from all the things that I have liked, the things that I didn't feel comfortable with for personal reasons, and also understanding other people in the fandom and their own personal journey with it and how it made them feel and still makes them feel. One of the best things that I think it has done for me, and I guess a big part of the Star Wars fandom, I think would agree with me, is how much it made me care about storytelling and how much it makes me want to feel hopeful about the possibilities of where this series can go when it's time to do the next trilogy, or better yet, set of films. It made me care for Star Wars. It made me care about Star Wars and what's best for it and what works or doesn't work. I never knew that a movie like that would give that kind of effect on me, with the exception of The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, if anything, made me appreciate Star Wars and what it has to offer and can offer in different levels of diverse and well-thought-out storytelling and symbolism in it as a plus, I might add. But The Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, made me care, and I think that's what makes it unique. I've said it before, I'll say it again, as we're about to hit the 60-minute mark. I can't believe this show went on as long as it did. That was not my intention. I love The Rise of Skywalker. I just do. I think it is pure 100% Star Wars and a magnificent closure to an amazing 9-film arc. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is a credit unto itself. It really is an achievement. It is an absolute achievement, done in a very short period of time. What Star Wars has done for these 46 years now, is nothing short of miraculous. Just an incredible batch of filmmaking. And I heard on another podcast, I think it was Around the Galaxy, they were interviewed. It might have been Talking Bay 94. But they were having an interview with somebody who was involved in the creative process of Star Wars. And he said he heard from somebody else who made the comment that the prequels is one of the last trilogies of films that you'll see with one sole creator behind all of it, for good or bad. That's pretty amazing. And I think it speaks to how well those three movies flow together. Regardless of your feelings of them, those three films are the most cohesive of all 9 movies. But getting back to what Miranda said, and I echo her comments, I adored The Rise of Skywalker. There's no point, there's no minute in that film that I do not want to watch. If I'm walking out of the room and I'm watching it, I'm pausing it. And even then, I don't want to pause it because I just enjoy the ride on so many different levels. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Want to encourage you to go on over to mynerdworld.net. On mynerdworld.net, by the way, if you go to the blog page, My Nerd Blog, there are details on how you can get autographed EMBARK books. I put up the details for anybody who wants to get their existing book autographed or has not purchased the trilogy and wants to purchase it and get those books autographed. The details are available at My Nerd Blog. Basically, all you got to do is send me $5 in the books, and I will sign them and send them back to you. It's really quite that simple. So go to mynerdworld.net. You can get all the details about the EMBARK stories and podcasts that I do. EMBARK Book 1, Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, and Book 3, The Vanishing War, are available right now in ebook, paperback, and audiobook, narrated by me, its author. They make fantastic gifts. Gone Corbin and the Asteroid of Misfortune, Book 4 is currently out being proofread, and I'm praying that I can get it up on Amazon before Christmas. That's my goal. This will be a story that takes place after Book 3, The Vanishing War, and it will serve as the link to the next trilogy, which will drop at the very beginning of 2021. I just finished the first draft on Book 5. Not going to give away the title just yet, but it will be the beginning of a brand new trilogy, and we do go forward in the timeline about 11 years. Really excited about this Gone Corbin story, this fun little comedic action adventure. and then this next trilogy that I'm hard at work on. I cannot wait to get it out next year. Pray that 2021 is better than 2020. But if you want to support the podcast, you can go and pick up a copy of my book for you or a friend. Do it as a gift to get yourself a signed copy by going to mynerdworld.net, or just go to amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and pick up your preferred version of my science fiction space opera series. Have yourself a fantastic week. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Early Merry Christmas to you, and we'll talk to you again next week for another review of The Mandalorian. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.